understand our guest is ready.
Yeah. Yes.
Our first guest for the day. Abby, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Abati. So how does this decision to reopen schools sit with government's policy on primary and secondary education? What is the government's motive for agreeing to a reopening when countries with similar COVID-19 challenges with Nigeria are hurriedly sending children home from school? And what is the overriding interest of the private sector in this push to keep the schools open? For a lot more on this, we're now being joined from Ife in southwest Nigeria by Professor Kemi Rotimi of the Department of History of Obafemi Awolowo University. Welcome to the program, Professor.
Thank you very much. Happy New Year to you all.
We wish you the same, sir.
This reopening of schools at whatever level, in my view, is like government pandering to the business interests of private school owners who have my sympathy because their businesses have been on hold for so very long. But truth be told, Nigeria will never know how many people have fallen or will fall victim of this pandemic. We don't keep statistics. What is all of this stampede? A government that can force people to go do NIN registration at the time of this pandemic, does it then come as a surprise if the same government is asking people to go back to school? Now, I teach in Obafemi University Ife. I do not know what is in place to encourage the return of students to school in this university that can guarantee safety for the many people who will be trooping in by the time our doors are flung open. What do you do about social distancing? There's no room in Obafemi University that contains less than 6 students. What are you going to do? Remove some beds or chase some of the students out? And in many of these universities, a new session or an ongoing session was on by March last year when the universities were shut down along with other schools. Now you're asking them to come back. There's nothing in place, nothing significant in place. As for the primary and secondary levels, it's a gambler's game. That's the way I would put it. Because when schools reopened the other day before the Christmas, New Year holidays, government probably thinking that there were not too many deaths or whatever statistics were hidden from government. Therefore, why can't they go back now? But you can see the pressure from the private sector education providers. And we know 1 or 2 names in respect of universities, be very strident. But how many students are in the private universities? They can do social distancing. They can do all kinds of, they can observe many of the protocols. But for public schools up to universities, it's going to be a Herculean task. And it is a risk that we are all taking. But because we don't keep statistics, we may never really know how many will be affected.
Well, Professor Rotimi, if I may play the devil's advocate, it may not be fair to say that the federal government has taken this decision based on the preferences of private owners of schools. Because you will recall that the Federal Ministry of Education said the decision had to be taken after due consultation with commissioners of education of all the states. And out of those commissioners, 24 states voted for reopening, 4 opposed it. The remaining ones abstained from taking a categorical decision. And then, in any case, other stakeholders were told, were consulted. And the position of the federal government is that for the school start examinations, schools were reopened, and that went successfully. And that it's better to keep the schools open than to allow the students to stay home. This is the argument from their side. But what will you recommend now that we're faced more or less with a fait accompli, just in case the number of infections in schools and among staff goes up?
Now, as I've said, it's a gambler's world. Everybody is gambling. And the way I see it is like, okay, schools reopen, everybody is watching. would there be the incidence of coronavirus in any school affecting so many pupils? I'm talking now about the primary, tertiary levels. You've talked about reopening schools for school start. How many pupils were involved? So we must look at it from that angle. I heard you yesterday when the permanent secretary, Federal Minister of Education, labored very hard to persuade you about the sense in about the sense in what they did. In a way, it made it look like it's a democratic order. If many more states voted for, and just a few were against, they were inclined to oblige. But the worry is about the public school system. There is nothing in place. I saw your reporter this morning reporting from Abuja, but that's even the federal capital. Who is going to report from Igboho? Who will report from Tonkere near Ife? So it's like we're waiting to see if there will be a spike, and then how many will be affected. They will go back again to whether we should shut the schools or not. It's okay. We wait and see. There's nothing to prescribe. The governments have taken the decision to reopen schools. We just wait and watch, because the pieces of advice you people have given on your channel, on other channels, the NMA and all other groups, when they talk about these stakeholders, becomes a buzzword. Stakeholders, what are these stakeholders? People just want to keep the schools open. Well, yes, fine, but are we taking cognizance of what can happen if there is a spike? I have no answer for them.
Professor Rotimi, sorry to cut in there. You've mentioned quite a number of times about how this is a gambler's game. But it poses the question, is this too expensive a game to play when it comes to lives? When we talk about precautions that could possibly be put in place, I have two questions. Whose responsibility is it to basically put people together, a critical mass to put these points forward? And more importantly, if we're waiting to see what happens, could it be a case of medicine after death, for lack of better words, sir?
I will answer from the second question. Yes, it will be medicine after death. And it looks to me like that is the only time government will appreciate that the decision taken may have been a wrong one. But what was your first question again?
Whose responsibility is it to put this forward to the right authorities to say, are we doing it the right way? Should we look at online learnings? You have look at Western markets, economies are finding ways to improve learning. It's happening there, but they're looking at alternative means. Why have we not approached that yet? And what's the stumbling block?
Online learning may be like the new normal, to use one of the new expressions, but the pandemic came to everybody unprepared, and in third world settings, nothing had been put in place for online learning, not much of it. I mean, most public universities in Nigeria, because I'll keep talking about the one that I know well, cannot do online learning. And you cannot do that overnight because the basic facilities are not even there. As I'm talking to you now, I'm running a generator just to be able to connect with you. So, and that's another story for another day. But the facilities are not there. So let's not even, this online learning thing that the private school proprietors have been talking about as if it's a big deal. We didn't prepare for it, and we are not going to be able to achieve that overnight. It is the responsibility of those who own the schools to make sure there is adequate provision for people to survive. I mean, how many public institutions in Nigeria have usable toilets? Usable toilets. From the Federal Secretariat in Abuja to Wafmalo University to any other school for that matter. I mean, this and at a time like this, hygiene comes first. And the way we do these things, government has pronounced schools will reopen. You could see vice chancellors falling over themselves announcing dates that they will reopen. What have they put in place? But this is a praying nation. Everybody is praying that God will protect us. Now, by the time the students now come in, God help us. One or two cases who may have come in from home already challenged, and then they rush to their centers that have no provisions for anything. If there is a
Prof.
fatality, there will be a looter.
Okay, Prof. I'll come back to you after this quick commercial break. There's a lot to talk about still on this matter. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. Still the morning show right here on the Rise News channel. Professor Kemi Rotimi of the Department of History of FML Law joins us on this conversation on school reopening. So, Prof, you've made very many vital points, but I just want to ask salient questions about, number one, ASU. I think ASU said at some point, a rep of ASU did say at some point that if ASU could create the software for payments of lecturers, then they can also create a software for online learning. So isn't it because really, Prof, most of this thing too is software. A lot of these people can have handheld devices, smartphone, then you create a platform, then the teacher dispenses, and then you can do the communication letter through via email and the likes. You expect that most students have that edge as regards, sending emails, if they can go on WhatsApp, or you set up WhatsApp groups where there are further interactions on that. But I just want to ask, are there not moves by ASU to be able to do this in partnership with the federal government? If possible, the federal government mandates ASU. We have a general software where, people can just go in, log into the class and get lectures from there. Because this online learning, it's not that it's new in Nigeria. A lot of Nigerians, even professors like you, got their degree by studying the likes of University of Liverpool online, and they just went abroad for their graduation. So it's been ongoing for quite a while in this country. People are getting degrees online, so there's no big deal about it. And secondly, Professor, I'm very scared this morning, and I'll tell you why. Before the second wave started, a certain school in Lekki had over 100 students down with COVID. There was a COVID wave. Those were 2 isolated cases that were reported. And we didn't hear how that case went. Maybe the students recovered or not, but they said they've been able to keep them in the school then. And now schools are reopening. If we can have independent cases where you can have a mass amount of students getting COVID at a time. Are you as scared as I am on this?
Worse than you are. Because as I said earlier, we will never and may never know how many people will fall victim or are falling victim of this pandemic because of the challenge we have with statistics. The Lekki school you talked about, we all read about it. Yes, just like you are wondering whatever happened, conspiracy of silence, and then that fizzled. Now, and that happened because that is a private school. Do you know how many public schools might have been as challenged as that Lekki school was at the time, but no reporting? And then some pupils came to school today. You didn't see them again a few days later, and then, couldn't be bothered. The population of pupils and students in public schools, that is the challenge, that's a major one. So I'm as worried as yourself, and as I've said, we know what the challenge is. Sanitation in our public institutions, including schools. As for developing app or whatever for online learning, many universities in Nigeria have distance learning programs, and they do online. It's not as if it is unknown. It is about expanding the base to cover the many students that you have in our public institutions. Of course, we all know what has happened between the federal government and ASU, and even as we speak this morning, it is still an unfinished business. Who knows? By February, there may be a return to the trenches. So ASU can develop whatever app the government wishes or challenges it to. But that's not the concern now. The concern is with IPPIS and academic allowance. Get it right. I'm an anti-strike person. I'm a university teacher, but I'm not particularly amused by prolonged strikes. No, I don't think the gain is that much. But if we all redirect our minds to things more productive, yes, this can be done.
Well, Prof, two quick questions. There are persons who will say that markets and churches have reopened. And if markets and churches are back in business, why not schools? Second, many of those pushing the argument for the reopening of schools are quoting UNICEF. UNICEF says the closure of schools should be a last resort, the last measure to be adopted because of the cost of keeping the schools shut down. And UNICEF, Henrietta Fore, who is the executive director of UNICEF, says that, in fact, many countries cannot afford to keep the school system shut for another academic session. Here in Nigeria, our universities have been shut down for a whole academic session. Some universities are about to cancel the 2019-2020 academic session. Now, do you feel comfortable with another academic session lost on account, say, of COVID?
Yes, you see, this thing about markets, churches, actually, that is what has informed this whole clamor about reopening schools. But there are different things. And, but as I've said, because this is a nation that privileges praying over scientific evaluation of situations, and therefore, it's not my portion, our God will do it, and that kind of jazz. Reopening schools may be desirable. Nobody wants schools to be shut forever. I think it was on your station where there was a very angry retort about this UNICEF recommendation, either your station or your sister station. And I connected with the individual who reacted that sharply. What is this so big deal? What is the big deal about this UNICEF advisory? Because if this thing gets to schools, it can be, the disaster can be avoided. But everybody is playing the waiting game. Let's try. Let's try and see what will happen. So for me, it is not so much about there is no logic deriving from this thing about opening churches and markets. It is because we do not keep statistics. How many states are testing anybody for coronavirus anyway? You discuss this in every day on your station and other stations. How many states, apart from Lagos? Many of these things they report overnight or at the break of the day about how many have been infected. Are they really derived from serious testing or proper statistics? How many states have centers to keep people, isolation centers to handle cases? This thing is just about doing things the way we have always done things, half-heartedly, and in my view, not seriously. Yes. So,
Professor Rotimi, can you hear us? Are you with us, Professor Rotimi?
hello?
Hello, Professor Rotimi. Okay, I've just got another question for you, please. And we're still on this topic of alternative means of learning. I'm going to hop on that a little bit. As Rufai mentioned earlier, it's not, if we can see the government expending funds towards other, issues that are termed quite topical or important, why not something? I think one thing the last year has been able to teach us is that the philosophy of learning and working has evolved drastically, a lot faster than a lot of us were prepared for. And one of those key areas would be, how do we take classroom learning and basically still be able to absorb that in a different environment, which we have seen a lot of other governments achieve quite successfully. It's very easy for us to say that let's wait and see what happens, but how long are we going to sit back and watch for? By the time we have a case of what we're trying to avoid, it might be a little too late. So my question is around solutions, as opposed to highlighting that which exists or the status quo. How do we then address what we know to be a problem? And what are the steps that can be taken immediately in that regard?
The solution is about investing more money in education. Public universities in Nigeria, many of them were breathed into existence. A government wakes up, created 10 more universities. You just breathe them into existence. So it's about putting more money into education. You talked about ASU developing app. That's not a big deal. When the app has been developed, how do you apply the app? Is it for free? Government will have to invest. And right now, the government is not in a position to invest as much as it should. It has to be massive. But I'm also contending that we cannot get these things done in a hurry. This thing came just the other day and we're struggling with it. The processes will be gradual. Those of us who work in older established Nigerian universities know what we are talking about. The population, it is explosive. We are dealing with too many students that providing for them could be a challenge. Online learning will involve owning of laptops, for instance. How many parents want to go that extra mile? Yes, the students have their phones. They use the phones for all kinds of silly things. It's not as if they must adapt using their phones for proper learning. They will, but then the...
Okay. Okay, Prof, we'll go for a quick break. We'll come back and we'll talk some more. All right, welcome back. I will say Professor Kemi Rotimi of the Department of History of FMLO University. We're still talking about school reopening. So two things, Prof. Number one, if you remember, the last time we reopened school after the long COVID lockdown break, something was significant. We reopened school amidst a lot of testing. In fact, there was first a dispute about price of testing. I remember particularly in Ogun State, the governor had to intervene and say, okay, don't make testing this expensive and all of that. But this time, it's different. We're reopening school after a second wave that has higher numbers than the first wave, and I have not heard anybody talk about protocols for testing for COVID in those schools. Secondly, I want to talk still about this distant learning thing. You said the government is not ready to spend, but we have antecedents, even as regards getting tabs. You stay in the state of Osun, as it's called, Osun State, and it was in that same state, with one of the lowest IGRs in this country, that a certain governor provided appointment for the students. Underline the lowest IGR, I think second or third lowest IGR, government revenue, government allocation, according to the states. Third or fourth lowest, one of the lowest in this country. But tabs were still provided for the students. Is it not about getting our priorities right? Or what is the issue itself? Why can't we just do this?
Let me start with the appointment thing. You spoke about it last week on your program and waxed very lyrical about the person who initiated it. Have you done a post-Agbeshola regime check on the fate that has befallen appointment? And even while it lasted, after the launch, how far did it go? I'll stop at that. The thing about testing now that schools have reopened, you are aware, just as I am, that immediately it looked like there was some respite after the first wave. Isolation centers were shut down. Reactivating them now has become a challenge. There is substantial dishonesty in how governments are run in Nigeria, if truth must be told. Now, there is silence about testing because for many people in government, it is just that students have resumed after the Christmas and New Year holiday. This renewed wave of the pandemic and the people, the way it is killing people, I'm not sure after the hoo-ha about known names that have fallen victim, the many unknown names that are falling victim, who cares about them? It is about basic dishonesty in the governmental process. That is the truth. So Nobody's going to test anybody. Let's get that right. And everybody is hoping that God will intervene. So, I don't know. Nobody's going to do any testing. No testing will be done. You go to school, if you can afford the mask, you wear it. If your parent can afford it, otherwise, you go. School authorities will determine whether they allow you into the classroom or not. Everybody is now left to use our own devices. That is the truth. Government is not in charge.
Well, Prof, ordinarily, one could assume that the tertiary institutions should be able to reopen the classrooms because the students at the tertiary level, they are more mature, they are more aware compared to students at the primary and secondary school levels. But this is not the case. The ASU president talks about the universities not being prepared, alternative modes of teaching and learning not being in place. But at the same time, he raised the issue of the agreement with the federal government that 2 out of the 6 months arrears being owed university teachers have been paid. The remaining 4 months have not been paid. And that, in fact, many university lecturers have not received their salary arrears for up to about 10 months. Now, which comes first? What's the bigger consideration for ASU? Although I recognize the fact that you say you do not believe in strikes. What is the bigger consideration for ASU? The fact that end allowances, as promised, have not been paid, or the threat of COVID-19 that ASU pursues?
Well, the answer is in your question. You know as well as I do, but you want me to answer it, I will. Which comes first? The payment of all outstanding monetary rewards, including salaries, and the earned academic allowances. But in some private correspondence with you some time back, I identified 3 demons in the Nigerian public university space. Actually, there are 4. You have the government, you have ASU, you have the non-academic, then you have the students. This thing about strikes is a relay. You know as well as I do that nothing will stop the non-academics in 3 groups from going on indefinite strike from tomorrow over the sharing formula of the earned academic allowances. So there is actually no movement in the direction of teaching anybody until ASU's monies have been paid. Those who didn't sign on to PPIS, once you have sorted that out, then the earned academic allowance, the 75%, is shared and is in accounts. There will be no enthusiasm to go back to the classroom. And then the non-academics, there is no way anybody will stop them from going on an indefinite strike. So, and then when you are through with that, the worry for me about asking students to come in, social distancing is an impossibility when they come. They are mature, they are adults, yes, they should know what is right. But what do you do to students who have been allocated into rooms, some 6, 8 or more? Do you eliminate some beds or push people to go and sleep wherever? So these are the challenges that a more serious approach would be to call vice chancellors and then let them talk to the Minister of Education or the NUC, the agency that disseminates news from government to overseas, to discuss what really should be in place before they can reopen. As we speak, I doubt that there are significant provisions made for avoiding a disaster when universities reopen. The problem with reopening universities is that if there is a challenge that may involve some fatalities, you know the tendency on the part of students. Don't forget, they were not in school when NSAS took place. And nobody prays that they should do their own NSAS on their campuses. You know what that can mean. So it is about commitment to good governance. That is lacking. And we don't need to make this point half-heartedly. Truth be told, Oguyemi is right about things not being in place to really encourage asking students to come back. And this 45-year-old leader of NAN, civil servant in Ekiti, part-time student, full-time worker, age mate of some governors, would be too glad to mobilize the crowd of students into some riot about the They took them, we took the boy to their center. They didn't provide anything, and the boy died. And then they will go on rampage. Can we avoid that?
I mean, food for thought, like you said, we'll go, right? But I just want to add a little bit to that. And I don't want to stir the honestness. But NASU and other unions too are on strike amidst all of this. Your take on that, sir?
I've already said it. There are 3 demons in the Nigerian public university space: teachers, non-academics, and students. And for strike, it is a relay. One group drops the baton, another one picks it up. Now it is the turn of non-academics. Then when they are through, if students have already resumed and there's any challenge, the students will pick the baton. So it's a conundrum, and it's a shameful conundrum. Now, can you imagine non-academics now talking about IPPIS? When ASU made it the major issue the other day, they kept criminally quiet. But now they say they have also come up with their own payment system. How many payment systems would the employer adopt before you can pay people? Then this thing about talking about, Ruben mentioned earlier, that universities for a whole session. That is not true. It's actually about the style of ASU, which is what has discouraged or disoriented some of us in this matter of strike. Nigeria was shut down between March and September. So it is illogical and that didn't make sense to some of us that ASU would say it was on indefinite strike at the time the nation was locked down. If ASU didn't declare a strike during lockdown, no university would still have run at that time. So strictly speaking, you can talk about universities not running for like just 4 months, but ASU had declared that it was on indefinite strike from March. So that's why everybody is making it look like universities have been shut down for 9 months because of ASU strike. That is not the truth. That's not the fact. But ASU has brought that on itself. What can you do? So, I mean, I don't know. The other thing is a shame.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Kemi Rotimi, for joining us on the morning show today.